Okay, well, I think we'll get started. Good morning. I'm Cheryl Lemke, and I'm the CEO and owner of Metiri Group, which is a small consulting group out of the Los Angeles area. We launched in 2000, and I have a background in education in the public sector. I taught for 10 years. I was a state technology director in Washington State for 10 years. I was associate commissioner for the Illinois State Board, in charge of data systems, infrastructure, and technology. And then I launched the company after I was at the Lemke Family Foundation for a while. So long career. Now, I'm delighted that you're here. This is one of my very favorite topics, students as agents in their own learning. And also, we're talking a lot about self-direction as well. So let's get started. First of all, just kind of the roadmap for this session. We're going to talk about what student agency actually is, why it's important, how teachers can empower students to be agents in their own learning, excuse me, and then how do you measure it? There's lots of different ways to do that. First of all, what is student agency? When I first encountered this term, it took me a while to get my head around it, about what it means to be to have agency, and I started thinking about, let me turn that phrase around a bit. So think about agents in their own learning. And so the formal definition that I put up here, and there, by the way, I don't know that there's any agreed upon definition, but there's lots of people out there who kind of agree on some of these aspects of it. One is that students have agency when they're self-reflecting and being metacognitive about their own learning, and then when they act or interact intentionally in order to influence their learning experiences. And that's kind of the definition that we're going to be using. But again, think about agents in their own learning. And I'd also like you to know that student agency is something that comes and goes, that sometimes students are agents in their own learning and sometimes not so much. So agency is like a moment in time. And are the students actually taking those actions or interactions? So let me just kind of describe a few examples of when students have agency. For example, when they're taking intellectual risks. And what I mean by that is that they're in a group, there may be in a discussion, and they've got something to share, and they actually don't know if it's right or wrong, how people are going to react to it, and yet they're in an environment, a learning environment, where they feel safe, so they actually take that risk. So they're metacognitive about it. They actually take the action to share and then listen to that interaction. So that's agency. Another one down here is managing time. When students actually think about their own learning and actually manage their time so that they use it wisely to get the kinds of things that they're wanting to do done. A third one that I put up there is selecting the mode of digital resources in a way that's helpful to them. Sometimes teachers do choice boards where they actually, if they want kids to study something, they might put up a board with four ways that the students can actually learn about it. It might be an animation, a simulation, a PDF they can go read, or maybe even a textbook or a video. And then the teacher might say, well, what I'd like you to do is choose 2 out of the 4 and use that to kind of inform your knowledge base about this process. And the reason that students are agents in their own learning is they look at that and say, what is my learning mode? What is my best learning mode? Or they might actually look at all 4 and say, I used 2 of these and I still don't understand this quite. So I'm going to actually go after a 3rd one or a 4th one. So again, agents. And another one is collaboration. And collaboration is more than just cooperation. Collaboration is when you're working on one thing and you listen to who's with you and you build on their ideas. That's very intentional in terms of where the learning is going. So again, agency with those. A couple more. practicing with intention. Even when kids are doing, kind of the practice thing with ST math or so, they can actually be agents in their own learning by thinking about this. And I was in a classroom in Los Angeles. I'm an evaluator. So for example, we are the evaluator for the state of Utah for all the digital teaching and learning programs in the 85 school districts up there. And we also do a big project with the California Emerging Technology Fund called School to Home with low performing middle schools in this area. And I was in one of those about before COVID, when we could actually get in and do site visits. And this school had a really interesting approach. They would identify students who were low in math, and all of us have those. And they would say, well, what we're going to do is we're going to actually have 2 hours of math for these students, but we're going to do something very specialized. And so we were in there were about maybe 8 students in this class, and the teacher was very intentional about connecting with the mathematics teacher that these kids had, and whether it's algebra or general math or whatever it happened to be. What he did is he had them use the ST math. He had them use just a variety of some of them were drills, some of them were actually learning a little bit more about math with Khan Academy, for example. And one of the interesting things was he didn't just assign it and have the kids sit on that program for an hour as their extra hour of math. What he did is he talked with them about what they were doing in their other class, and then said, what's your goal for today? And they would actually set goals during this time. And then like when they were on Khan Academy, I was walking around the room asking them what they were studying. And they would say, well, in my algebra class, I need to do this. So I'm actually using Khan Academy in this video to learn a little more about that. So kids were very intentional about what they were doing. Another one is the creativity piece that we see, where kids are actually thinking outside the box and bringing that in their assignments, taking positions on self-identified issues based on evidence, where students would actually choose something to do. And so they're very intentional about what is it I'm really interested in, and then actually using evidence-based to actually do that. And finally, another one, obvious one, is tracking progress for college and career readiness, where they're actually tracking all of the courses that they have in order to make that happen. So lots of different examples about where kids can be intentional. And one of the things we're going to talk about during this session is, what can teachers do to open up opportunities for kids to have agency in their own learning. So what I'd like to do, now that I've given you a few examples, you probably are aware of many examples in your own classrooms. I'd like you to go to this Mentimeter, and there's 3 ways to get there. One is to go to www.menti.com and use this code. Another one is just the QR code, and then you can also use this link. So I guess maybe what I could do is put that link in, put that link in the chat so it's easier for you to get to. I'll do that. Will you guys go ahead and do this? There you go. It's there. And so just jump over there. It's going to ask you for 3 attributes of a student who is an agent in her own learning. So think about that, based on the examples that I've given. When they were in that moment, when they had agency, what were the characteristics and attributes of what they were doing? And I'm going to jump over to, excuse me, just one second. I'm going to jump over to the final. And let's see if we have any. Oh, look, we do have some. If you've never used Mentimeter, by the way, it's kind of a cool tool. with minor use, it's free of charge. There is with kind of the saving of all years, there's other things, but it's interesting to kind of see. And you can see in the middle, the word cloud is very typical. The largest ones are the ones that we see most often: reflective, engaged, creative, metacognitive, thoughtful, curious. It's the kind of thing that we want all of our students to be. So they're in the Google presentation, in the notes, there is a link to the results, so you can kind of see that. So, and I'm really interested in tracks progress, self-motivated. I'm reading some of the interesting ones. Tough, that's an interesting one. Choice, focused, evaluative, help-seeking. Cool. That's great. A lot of people don't think about that, but that's absolutely true. We're going to talk about that in just a second. So let me go back to my slides. Just 1 second. Okay. What you've just done actually is it is actually listed a lot of the attributes and characteristics of a self-directed learner. And we're going to talk about self-direction and agency, and the way that they're connected is that a student with agency, as I mentioned before, self-reflects, acts, and interacts. But agency is fleeting. It's a moment in time where students grab the opportunity to have agency. Whereas self-direction is more of the characteristics and the foundation that gets them ready to have agency. And so they have the knowledge and the attitudes and the dispositions that empower them to be an agent in their own learning. And so, the difference between the two, and they are very connected, is that this one is that moment in time when they're actually taking the action or interacting and being that agent. Whereas this one is something that you can build over time, that the student has the capacity to take agency, to be in that moment, and is predisposed to do it. And that's really powerful. So we're going to talk a little bit about self-direction because it's so connected to agency. So there are three aspects of self-direction that I want to talk about. And it's what happens before learning, what happens during learning, and what happens after learning. And again, this is all self-direction. So we're looking at what students should be doing. The first one is pretty obvious. It's growth mindset. And we really need to continue to build that in our students, that they believe that all of the things that they accomplish or don't accomplish in school is because of effort and perseverance. And Carol Dweck's work is so good in that arena. That they've got a clear understanding of what they should be accomplishing. And this means that they're an agent in the sense that if they don't understand, they ask, that they persevere until they actually get kind of that clear idea of where they're going. And we'll give you some examples about how to make that happen. That the student actually develops a plan and maps out activities. And sometimes if it's a larger project, actually does ticklers in calendars about where they're going, so that they know that they can actually accomplish whatever the goal happens to be. And finally, that they find a hook that piques his or her interest in it. And it's interesting because a lot of people think that self-directed students or students with agency are naturally curious and naturally motivated to learn. And that's so not true. What these students have learned to do with help from their parents and their teachers is to get engaged, to get motivated, to get curious about this. And I'll show you ways that teachers can actually initiate this, but you also can just help students say, we're studying the circulatory system, and it's really connected to health in this way. So think back on some of the experiences that you've had, and think about how that circulatory system is connected to that. So there's ways to actually help kids get curious about what you're teaching, because in the end, we want kids to be really interested in what you're teaching and what the goals and the standards are, by connecting it to their own lives. So So that's before learning. Okay, then during learning, the student should be managing their own learning. And so, especially during COVID, this was important, establishes a place where she can succeed. One of the things that we found, especially in the LA area, where, you know, students were actually Zooming from closets. And from the kitchen table with all sorts of activity around them and so on. So they really need to establish a place where they can succeed. And if there's distractions, they move away from their distractions. They put headphones on. They do something so that they ignore those distractions. The self-directed learner also monitors her own progress by reflecting on her performance. So, for example, if a child is reading reading an article, he or she actually interrupts himself from time to time to say, oh, did I just get what they just said? I don't think I did. I don't understand this word. Let me look this word up. And am I really getting the essence of this idea? So they monitor their own progress and are metacognitive about it. I was in a classroom doing an observation in Washington State a few years back, and the lesson was middle school mathematics and on ratio and proportion. So I was walking around the room and I was asking kids what they were doing. And this little girl says, oh, we're doing, you know, ratio. And she was explaining it to me. And then she said, oh yeah, we're also being metacognitive today. I went, whoa, what does that mean? And she nailed it. She really knew what it was. And the reason I'm telling that story is that it's so important for us not to do things to children, but to actually teach them about the behaviors and the dispositions and the attitudes that we want them to have and why they're important. And it's one of the things, it's one of my messages to you today. If you want students to be agents in their own learning and to be self-directed, then you need to kind of step back and say, this year, one of our goals is actually to ensure that you are a self-directed learner. Here's what this means. And every time I give you some advice and counsel about this, we're going to actually talk about it. We're going to talk about what you should be doing and the behaviors and so on, and why it's important, and step back and say, okay, this is part of self-direction. So kids actually know about it. Another one is talks yourself through challenging talks herself through challenging parts where they're actually, again, metacognitive and self-instruct. So I used to do that as a high school student. I distinctly remember in my physics classes, physics was really hard for me. And so I remember being in my bedroom reading the text and then closing it up and saying, okay, could I teach somebody about that? And it was really helpful to do that self-instruction. And not all kids figure that out on their own. And then finally seeks help when she needs it, which is one of the things that you all talked about. And then finally, after learning, where a student who is self-directed actually, again, doesn't stop by saying, okay, I'm done, boom, I'm going to send this in. Instead, that the student actually sits back and compares her progress to the standards of excellence. And you can help with that by having rubrics and helping kids understand what that excellence really means and what it looks like. And you can model that for them. The second one is really an important one. It takes ownership for his or her own performances, where if a student actually gets a paper back and it's a B, he was expecting an A, the student actually says, okay, I really didn't do as well as I should, and I know why. I know I shouldn't have gone to that basketball game last night and I should have stayed home and studied, or I should have taken better notes, because when I went to read my notes, I couldn't understand a lot of them, or whatever that happens to be. But he or she takes ownership in their own learning. They also take pride. One of the things I think is really missing from a lot of our classes is that intellectual accomplishment. And you all know that the idea of, I worked really hard on this paper and look what I've done. People are reacting really positively to it. And then finally, accurately evaluating his or her own performance and then adjusting accordingly. And this one's a really interesting one. This is about the data piece. And one of the things that we find, and this is for students as well as for teachers and administrators, there's some researchers who write for Ed Week, and one of the columns that they did a few years back was about data. And what they found, they actually did a study on this and found that although about 80% of teachers actually look at data and think about data, only about 20% of them change anything in their classrooms based on the data. And so it's almost like a waste of time, other than the fact that they know their kids are progressing. And we see the same thing with kids. Oftentimes they get papers back, they look at the A or the B or the comments and then toss it, and they don't really think about adjusting their strategies. There was a study done a few years back that I thought was really interesting, where this group looked at teachers who actually gave grades only, teachers who gave comments only, and teachers who gave both. And what they found was that if a kid got a paper back and there was a grade on it, they would look at the grade, ABC, whatever it happens to be, and toss it. But if there were comments on it only, they would actually read the comments. And that's really important for us to think about, because one of the things we want kids to do is to learn from their mistakes and their, and to see mistakes is just an opportunity for learning. So think about that. So self-directed learning before, during, and after. And if kids have this kind of foundation, they can take opportunities to actually become agents in their own learning. So let's talk about that. Just a quick summary. Again, agency is that fleeting moment when kids are agents. And, in reality, sometimes kids are agents in their own learning and sometimes they're not. Sometimes they are in science, but they're not so much in English language arts and so on. And yet the kid who is self-directed has that foundation and is predisposed to actually be that agent in their own learning. So the next thing we're going to do is talk about why it's important. First one is, and this is kind of the really important thing that I'd love you to take away from this session, is that one of the things that student agency does, it shifts the power in the classroom. It shifts the motivation to learn from extrinsic rewards about grades and parents' expectations and punishments, really, into that intrinsic driver of the student's need to know and learn and be competent. And we want kids to think about that. And so that metacognitive part is actually so important. And a simple example of that is when kids actually are tracking their own progress. It's interesting to see how much difference that makes when kids actually have a spreadsheet and enter their own grades and track their own progress. So then they set goals about the level that they want to be at, and they're also looking at actually the learning. So just a kind of an aside, we do a lot of analysis of how engaged students are in learning, and these are kind of the levels that we have kids all the way from defiant, withdrawn, compliant, low tactical, high tactical, and intrinsic. And intrinsic really is about wanting to, if you're studying the circulatory system, you really are interested in that. You want to know about it. You're actually involved in the engagement. The tactical, the difference between the highest level and these two is that this person wants to know, is really interested in the subject and in learning that subject. These guys are interested in the extrinsic reward of, I got to get into a good college, I've got to meet my parents' expectations, et cetera, et cetera. I've got to be as good as my fellow students and so on. And one of the things that we really need to do is get to kids more into that level, where you can actually, where kids are actually more interested. And that's what the student agency is really all about. That intrinsic is the student sees the activity as meaningful, that the level of interest is high because he or she has taken ownership of that and says, okay, I'm studying the circulatory system. Now, what kind of connections do I have in doing that? And finds the task interesting and challenging. And the student's emphasis is on that performance. So let me stop for just a second and kind of get you a little more engaged in this. One of the things I'd like to do is to open up the chat. And I'd like you to think about, let me see if I can find my chat. And I'd like you to think about this question. If I was actually beginning to teach logic to you, I'd like you in the chat to share just one example of in your life of where you've used logic before and what logic means to you and how you're going to connect your life to the logic that I'm going to teach you. So let me stop there and just get on the chat and let's see what you come up with. Purchasing a car, deciding who to vote for, voting. I think that's on our minds these days, isn't it? Buying a home, to go to college, making decisions, buying groceries, geometry, medical issues, et cetera, et cetera. You can see how easy it is to actually kind of put something out there and then get kids to really connect it to their own lives. And that's really what we need to do. It can be as simple as this, as talking about it or making some suggestions for it. Okay, and then one of the other things I'd like to end this session with is actually getting back to basics, that there are 4 basic psychological needs that we all have. And if your classroom actually meets those needs, kids will be happy, will be excited about learning, et cetera. And these are belonging or connecting. I can't tell you how important that is. And all of us have those experiences. I, as a junior in high school, moved to a different state. And the place I moved was actually very rigid. So you went into a classroom, you weren't supposed to talk a whole lot, and then you got a lecture, and then you did your assignment independently, and you never really connected. So as a new student, I was going, how do I ever meet anybody? You know, I never felt like I belonged in that school as a result. Power or competence. Kids want to be competent. And I'll show you some examples of how you might make that happen. And then freedom and choice. They want choice in their lives. And of course, they want fun. And we always have to make room for fun in the classroom as well. So again, another Mentimeter. I'm really interested in knowing why you are interested in student engagement, what you hope to get out of it by empowering kids to be engaged in their own learning. So again, a little Mentimeter, a real quick one. There's a QR code. I'm going to put this in the chat. So if you want to use the link, it's easy for you to do. There we go. And I'll give you just a second to get in there and let us, short answers this time, let us know why you're interested in student agency. Oh, I should go back to that so you can have the QR code if you want. Okay, so let's see what some of these answers are. Increase engagement, ownership, empower students to engage and reflect. If we don't have students connected, we'll lose them through dropout or daydream. You're absolutely right. If they don't pay attention, there's nothing going into that short-term and long-term memory. Students to be more intrinsically motivated, wanting to learn. create engaged adults. That's really an interesting one, because one of the things that we found, we've been studying self-direction for, I don't know, 15, 20 years. And one of the things we find is that when kids are self-directed, they are ready to learn and they're successful in life because they take ownership in their own learning. Good, perfect. You guys absolutely get it. Okay, so now let's get into how you do that. Let me go back to my slides here. Okay, so let's talk about how you do it. How do you empower students to be agents in their own learning? And I have 7 of these. There's probably more that I could have put up, but one is to promote, excuse me, so I can see this, promote intellectual risk-taking. This is really important. And what it means is you create a culture of learning that is safe. Let me just go to the next slide and then I'll come back to this one to finish up. But one of the things that we also do in Google Data Studio is we have surveys of students on how engaged they are. And one of the questions we ask, here's a student, when we do our reports, we actually show teachers and administrators how their students responded. And this student question is, in my classes, I can share my ideas and thoughts without worrying about being teased if my ideas are not quite right. And you can see that in here, you've got, you've got about 1/3 of the kids who are disagree or strongly disagree with that statement. These kids are not happy about being in school, and they don't feel intellectually safe. And if you look at we do it by grade as well, and you can see that it's pretty much across the board in almost every grade. There is about 1/3 of the kids who are not feeling intellectually safe. And so how do you do that? Well, one of the, let me go back to the other slide. One of the ways that I've seen teachers do it is really a cool one. It's called the wall of words and qualifiers. And this is actually a 2nd grade classroom. And I was, again, doing site visits. And I asked this teacher what this chart she had up in terms of words, like it was based on what I know now, and based on these data and so on. I was going, well, what is that? And she said, a lot of kids won't speak up unless they know what the right answer is. So what I do is I tell them that we're continuing to learn, and they can give an answer today based on what they know, but tomorrow can change their mind. And it creates this safety in the classroom. So she said a kid might say, well, based on the evidence that I have today, I think I take a position on like this, but tomorrow I might change my mind. And sure enough, they might come in tomorrow having learned more or listened and change their mind. And that was huge. I've actually tried that, and it actually does really work, where now they don't have to be right all the time. They can actually share where they are in that journey of learning. Another one is respect. Of course, grades based on progress and effort make a huge difference. Relevant feedback, hints and questioning, and that whole idea of respect is actually so important. And this is really how you set up your culture of learning, and how you promote that intellectual risk-taking so they can be agents in their own learning. Another one is to explicitly teach students to be self-directed. And I mentioned this before, but talk about what self-direction is and why it's important, and why you want them to be self-directed. And actually, this is kind of a journey. It's not an event. So if you teach them what self-direction is, then every day you should be pointing out when a kid is self-directed or has that student agency. Point that out and reflect on it, model it, for example. And when you're teaching aspects of self-direction, point out what you're doing. Redesign the learning to enable self-direction. One of the things that we find is that you can have the best intentions, but if your lessons are so locked down that kids don't have the opportunity to make choices and make decisions and learn from those, they won't be self-directed. And so, for example, here's some kind of general ones first, and then I'll get into some more specifics. Growth mindset is a huge one. The idea of, you guys are familiar with that, stories of effort, praise effort, not intelligence. Make sure that they're connected to what they're learning, so engage them, and grades based on profit. I talked a little bit about those before. Another one is helping students to make those personal connections to the subject, show them the big picture. And I'm going to show you a few examples of that. Help them to develop schemas that show interrelationships. And facilitate the goal setting. And I talked a little bit about that as well. So let me give you an example of what a teacher might do. This teacher is in, I think, 9th grade, teaching a unit on heat and temperature. And she wants to kind of make visible the misconceptions and preconceptions that students have about a subject or a topic before she actually delves into it. It kind of opens up the hood and lets her know what the kids are thinking about the topic. And so this is one that was shared. So she's teaching this heat and temperature lesson, and she comes into class and she plops a cold can of pop onto the podium, and she says, "Okay, I want you to answer this question, or think about this question. If you were going to try to keep this coat cold, would you wrap it in a sweater, or would you wrap it in tinfoil? Go talk about that." And so the kids buzz about it for a little while, and then they come back and say, "Well, what's the answer? What's the answer?" And she said, "Oh no, I want you to think about it." So she lets them kind of think about it, go home and talk to their parents about it, talk to each other about it, and then come back. And so in the chat, I'd like you to put an answer in. Do you think it's the sweater, or do you think it's tinfoil? And if you want to, you can put some reason why you're citing that evidence. A lot of tinfoils coming up. And kids will come in and say things like, "Well, my mom always wraps my cola in tinfoil and puts it in my lunch. So I get, she used to do that when I was in high school or in grade school. So I guess it must be tinfoil." The reality, you want to know the right answer, or the correct answer is actually the sweater, because the sweater is an insulator and it keeps the cold in, and the aluminum is a conductor and actually conducts that cold right out into the room. So really, really great. Oh, and somebody put in the chat, tried and true method when growing up, tinfoil is less bulky. That's true than putting it in a sweater. But it's this kind of thing. And then they talk about it, about why did you choose tinfoil versus what's your experience with that? Why would that be? And then eventually they begin to understand why. And they actually might even test it in the classroom. Another one that I put up here is visualization. That, for example, if you're in a health class and you're teaching about sports injuries, for example, there's some beautiful visualizations that bring topics alive. So kids are really engaged in this. And one of the best ones I've seen is actually the New York Times interactive. Oops, it's okay. Now I have to go get rid of this. Sorry about that. All my screens are over it. But anyhow, subscribe now, log in. I'm actually a subscriber to this, but I won't log in. I'll just go back to my slides. But it's really important. And they have, if you actually get into this, they actually have they actually have visualizations like this once a week, and they have recommendations for teachers about how they might use this. For example, in this one, there was a suggestion that this one is injuries per 10,000 competitive plays to the different parts of the body. And one of the assignments was to go do the calculations and tell me what the probability of having a football injury is per 10,000 competitive plays versus, so on, and then turn that into a percentage. And of course, what you do is you just add all these things up, and then per 1,000, 10,000, and then change it into a percentage. But it's a great source of information. If you've never seen it, you gotta go take a look at it. Another one that teachers really need to be doing when we're teaching topics is to help kids understand the intersections among and between the things that we're studying. I taught mathematics for a long time, and one of the things I always had my kids do was try to set up a schema like this, a Venn diagrams that shows the relationships between quadrilaterals, parallelograms, rectangles, etc. You can see that the big circle or oval is actually a quadrilateral, and everything inside is a quadrilateral. So once you know that, you can say, oh, a rectangle is a quadrilateral, a parallelogram is, a square is, a rhombus is. Okay, so what's the next one? Oh, we've got parallelogram. So everything inside is actually a parallelogram. And it's a good way to understand that. Now, there's a lot of other teaching you need to do, but the reality is that that we can only hold 7 to 9 things in our working memory at any one time. Kids hit a test and they're asked about this, these aspects, and immediately this schema comes up. It's one thing that they can put into their working memory to reflect back on. It's huge. It really helps with long-term memory and with intersecting complex ideas, because the schema, if they had to think about each one of these, that would be 5 things in their working memory. But if they can remember the schema, it's only one thing, and they can add some other complexity to the work that they're doing. Another thing that we see teachers doing from time to time is taking a look at the big picture and helping kids to understand the big picture. So in this case, for example, there's 5 big areas in the standards for 8th grade mathematics. And then the teacher actually maps that out and eventually says, look what we're learning this year. And they're going, whoa. And then, they take it one at a time. And it's interesting how kids can actually see a roadmap to kind of where they're going. So think about that. I've talked a little bit about these, so I think I'm going to skip over them, about establishing that place and what we do prior to learning, after learning, during learning and after learning. The really interesting thing about self-direction that I want you to remember is that it's malleable. And that when kids are self-directed, that you can actually build their capacity to be self-directed. And we also, the literature also suggests that if a child is self-directed, and especially in the elementary school, if they have a teacher whom they're with all day, and that teacher doesn't allow for that and doesn't improve that, a teacher can actually kill self-direction in kids if they have that experience for 2 years. So that's scary. It's also kind of an equity issue, because a lot of kids do these things and are self-directed because they learn them at home. And we need to make sure that all kids have the opportunity to do that. It's really an equity issue as we go. I mentioned too much direction, focus on, I think we've talked about all of these in terms of how you inhibit. Another one is surface learning versus deep learning. This one is huge. If you get into, and the difference is that surface learning is all the foundational stuff, an increase in knowledge, memorizing, acquiring facts, etc. And deep learning is actually taking all that stuff and making sense of it from an abstract perspective. And this one is really about conceptual learning. And that's where standards want us to go. So we need to make sure that we don't just stay here, that we actually get it, allow kids to get in the game and do this. And one of the reasons I say getting in the game, interpreting and understanding reality in a different different way. A lot of the kids who actually would say tinfoil in the last example that I've given to you, they are actually reinterpreting their knowledge base based on the experiences that they have in the teaching that's going on. They're reinterpreting what they know and then pushing that into long-term memory. It's kind of like if you're playing basketball, that the surface learning would be running drills, running, layups, et cetera, all the drills that you do in basketball. But let me tell you, those kids would not do those drills unless they knew they could get in the game and actually do something with what they learn. And that's really important, that we need to make that happen. We also, we talked about one of the 4 psychological needs that kids have is actually being competent. And one of the ways that you can help them to be competent is to do some balancing between the complexity of the task that we give them and the skill level that they're on. And this is based on Csikszentmihalyi's work. Linda Darling-Hammond and Bransford has done some work on it. Pink has done some work on it. But in reality, what it says is you want kids to be in a flow where they're actually learning, where they're engaged. The flow experience is when time stands still, when you're so connected with what you're learning. I get that when I'm doing multimedia or data analysis. I love to do that stuff. And so I'll get into it and 2 hours will go by and I have no idea that any time has gone by. That's what the flow experience is. So and let me just kind of explain this. If the complexity of the task is way high and the skill level is way low, you get kids that are very, very frustrated. And on the other hand, if the skill level that they have in their repertoire is high and the task that you give them is so low, they are going to be completely bored. And what you want to do is find that intersection. And sometimes you have to differentiate learning because it's different for different kids. So think about that. A time check. Sorry, I better hurry. We're almost through the 7. The 6th one.
And Cheryl, sorry to interrupt. I just want to say we have to wrap up in 2 minutes. So I want to make sure we put in the survey link also.
Oh, sure. Yes, good. So the students need a repertoire of digital tools that they can actually do. And in this day and age, kids have to be able to use technology well. This is a digital inequity or equity issue, totally. And one of the things I provided for you that you can look back a little bit later is kids need to have this repertoire of tools, all the way from, are they just consuming and using? Are they experiencing, like adaptive learning? Are they creating and producing? And we do a lot of data analysis to show schools where they're concentrating and where they're not and what to work on. And then finally, the last one I like to talk about is that data culture, that in this day and age, we need kids to be evidence-based. And so create an expectation that is that kids, when they come to you with position on an issue or a presentation, that they need to use data to demonstrate why they're thinking the way that they're thinking. And this engages them and provides them agency. So last thing I'd like to share, I've got a few examples here that you can kind of go through later, but last thing I'd like to share is just a summary that we've given you a definition of agency and also self-direction, that we've given you the 3 aspects of before learning, during learning, and after learning. And we've given you 7 ideas for what you can do as teachers to make that happen. So with that, I'm going to wrap up. As we're putting a link. Elliot is putting a link into the chat where you can actually comment on what you've learned here. And I'd love to get your feedback. I'd like to see the things that you're interested in. I actually was going to ask that in a Mentimeter, but I've run out of time. I guess I might need more time management.
Yeah, thank you, Cheryl, so much. And I apologize that the link isn't in there. The link dropper may have left the session, but I'll try to find that and get it in there in the next few seconds. And really, thank you for the wonderful session. If folks can hang on for 1 more second, I'll get that link in there.
I might be able to do that. Let me look. Nope, I don't have it. I don't think I was given that. So Well, let me see if there's any questions that people have. I'm trying to kind of scroll through the comments. Love the idea of the definition of CVE and the agency item. Students are empowered daily to make important decisions about their learning experiences. That is awesome. That is great.
And we did put the survey link in there. I'm going to have to step out, Cheryl, but feel free to continue just because I have to get a next session set up. And thanks again so much to you and to everybody.
Good. Well, I'd appreciate it if you would actually look in the chat and get that link and complete that quick survey. So we're always, all of us are trying to get better. And so I'd be really delighted to see what your comments about, or what you liked, what you didn't like about the session, what we could have added more. Venn diagrams, when in doubt, draw some circles. I love it. You can tell I'm a math major. And people have actually in the blog, if in the chat, if you haven't been looking at it, people have been adding some resources in there as well. One of the things I did not have time to do that for those of you who are still on, I would like to show you is we actually do an assessment of self-direction we're working a lot with Utah. So we do a lot with Utah school districts where kids take a 15 to 20 minute survey and then do a self-assessment. And this is a Google Data Studio report that they get, where they get how self-directed are they from highly to not, and there's a definition there. And then we look at the dimensions of self-direction, where we look at, okay, where are your kids having trouble? Is it before learning? Is it during learning? Is it after learning? You can see if you look at the blue, which is the highly self-directed and quite self-directed, you can see that before learning, about a third of the kids are actually doing quite well. Here, it's less than a quarter, and here it's a little bit more than a quarter. So if I was working with a school district, I would say, here's where you need to concentrate in the next year to get kids more optimizing their performance as they're in the moment of learning and so on. And we also, the other thing that we do is we actually have actionable data where we not only ask kids how self-directed they are, but then we ask them, we know what the research says in terms of what can get them to be self-directed, like intellectual safety, et cetera. And we actually ask those questions about their classrooms. And so their teachers can say, oh, gee, I thought this was an intellectually safe environment, but my kids are saying, a third of my kids are saying that it's not. So maybe I should do something differently. So, and I think that we are.
Yeah, and Cheryl, I apologize. That was my mistake on the timing. We're actually good for a few more minutes. So if folks have questions, then absolutely. We have till 1 o'clock.
Oh, okay.
Sorry.
Well, let me see if there's anything else I should be talk with you about. I don't think so. I think we've really talked through, most of the issues. One of the things that we are really finding is that this is we've done a lot of work in self-direction. We worked with a school district outside of Chicago for a couple of years, went in quarterly and worked with their coaches on building self-direction in students. And one of the things that we found when we did our final analysis of the data was that it was the lower quartile of kids who benefited mostly from teachers teaching about self-direction. That the other kids, there wasn't a whole lot of difference, but when you looked at that lower quartile, they really soared in terms of academic achievement because they didn't have these skills ahead of time, and now they do. And it's malleable. It makes you can actually build self-direction in kids and be very cognitive and deliberate about that. And that's really huge. Let me see if there's any questions in the chat. Has anyone...
There was one about if there's an open source version of the self-direction questionnaire.
No, but if you're interested in seeing kind of the questions that we ask, I'm happy to send those to you. Just email me. On the first slide is my email address. I'm happy to just send those to you. The way that we organize it is we actually have those 12 areas. There's before learning, during learning, and after learning, and then there's 4 subcategories in each one of them. We actually ask questions about all of those, and then we roll those up into the score that you saw in our self-directed learning piece. And the way that we, let me see if I can find what, the way that we ask the questions is actually, is this, we give them a statement. Like I feel okay about sharing things, even though I know without being disrespected. And then we say, is this not at all like you, somewhat like you, all the way up to exactly like me? And so that's the scale that we use for all of our questions. So I'd be happy to send you that list of questions if you're interested in kind of seeing that and trying that out with kids. This has been really fun. This Google Data Studio, I don't know if you guys have ever used it, but I learned to use it over a weekend about a couple years ago. And I've actually built all of these reports. You can see that they're very cool, that, here's, if there's more than one administration, you can have it. You can actually filter by school. You can filter by grade. So I want to say, okay, what are the 11th graders doing? And boom, it changes. If you've never used Google Data Studio, what you do is you take the data, you link it up to Google Data Studio, and then you build these images. And you can do, you've seen the charts. You can also do tables of this. You can do all sorts of fabulous things with Google Data Studio if you've never seen it.
Cheryl, I see we have a raised hand from Nathan.
Great.
Nathan,
can you open that so he can ask his question?
Are you able to unmute, Nathan? Let me see if I can do that for you. Hold on. Okay. I think maybe, are you able to speak now?
Hey, there we go. I think so. Thanks, Elliot. Hi, Cheryl. How are you?
Hi.
So my wonder is with regards to the kind of like how student agency fits in the chronology of communities like making this shift into like broader personalized competency-based learning. Is like, do you think that there's a kind of point at which the groundwork or the foundations have been laid that allows for students or teachers to facilitate more agency within students? Is this something that can happen from the beginning as part of all the other efforts that are going into, demonstrated competency, like deep kind of differentiations within a classroom, like shared clarity and teacher clarity, like, any thoughts on the chronology?
It's a good question. I think that, the foundations that I've described for you in terms of self-direction are, cross curriculum, and they can be incrementally developed. And so like if you're moving into competency-based learning, it makes a lot of sense for kids to be self-directed as you're moving in that direction, or problem-based learning, or wherever you happen to go. And I think they can be done simultaneously, if you want to know the truth. I really do. Or you can actually look at self-direction and build those foundations prior to it. Would be if I had my druthers, I think that I would do it simultaneously, because it's exciting to get into this new venue, and the new venue allows you the freedom and openness to actually teach your students how to do this. Competency-based learning, for example, tracking their progress is huge. And taking ownership for that, and looking at the data and changing your learning strategies. And then you've got to teach them different learning strategies if the ones they're using aren't working. So it's all, I would do it simultaneously.
Yeah, I really appreciate those comments. And I also really appreciate your kind of focus on the elementary level, that it like this can be kind of crushed out of students if there's not a focus on this before they get into the secondary space. So thanks so much for the comments overall too.
Great. Well, I appreciate it. And I probably have talked too much during the session, but this area is a passion of mine. I'm so interested in equity. And this is one that is so critical. I do a lot of work in technology, but this part it really needs to be in juxtaposition with that technology to empower kids to do what they need to do with the tools that we have available. So thank you so much. And email me if you have more questions. Love to talk. Work with. Well, it's interesting because you could, you can share data on the typical academic data, where is what I was actually referring to, where they actually track their own progress. And it's best when you're doing that to allow them to return to the assignment and redo it, because that's so empowering when kids actually understand that they can actually learn from their errors and go back and redo something and make it better. And tracking their own progress and showing it in charts and graphs allows them to see kind of the ebbs and flows of their learning and where they could actually do a little bit better. And it encourages them to go back and do that. So anyhow, well, I'm signing off. Thank you so much for being here. Really appreciate it.